not seen him.
Significant number of us in unmarked cars and plain clothes. And
Did you
things like
guys
that.
know that the counter surveillance was as intense as it was while you were doing it, or was it something you kind of found out later?
No, we were aware of it. This was a guy. This was another case agent had this separate guy. So
Interesting.
we were quite aware. I mean, if you're going to watch this guy, you're going to be spending 4 or 5 hours driving in circles and
Yeah.
changing cars and things like that. And we did not have a ton of cars.
Yeah.
But
Well, that goes.
we came off of that, and it was about what we'd call our lunchtime. Of course, it was nighttime. It was a little bit before 8 o'clock, and my unit commander was aware. Obviously, people have been keeping tabs on my case because there certainly was an element of wanting to get something moving forward because this was kids involved, and he was actually watching the guy's storefront and just kind of wanted to do an impromptu, hey, let's go see where this guy goes tonight.
Yeah.
So there was about half of us came off of that, pretty intense other surveillance, and the boss was watching this one, and he's like, yeah, I think he's going to get off work. We'll see where he goes. Well, obviously I knew where this guy, at least I had an address for him. I'd been by before, seen his vehicle there. So I figured that's probably where he would land unless he was going somewhere else. So I just set up there. And long story short, he showed up, even though I was set up probably 100 yards away, and it's a fairly busy street. He had some good counter surveillance too, including probably somebody else. And I was discovered. I tried to extricate myself from just the scene without even identifying myself. He confronted me with a firearm. I couldn't escape.
You were undercover. Not
I
undercover,
was.
but you're working Vice basically, so you're in plain clothes.
I was in plain clothes, yes. Hadn't had a shave in a while.
Yeah.
Was driving very much a non-police car, and it wound up. He wound up pointing a gun at me, and he lost his life. I did shoot him, and it was a tragic end. It was absolutely not the end I would have preferred.
Right.
So that took place. The subsequent, follow-up investigation, it becomes a whole separate event took place. We executed search warrants on his business. We found, drugs and guns and things like that. But I leave. I leave the job the next day. I was well into the night, and the next morning, doing the officer-involved shooting process of the investigation. And I got sent home. So it was pretty routine. It's a couple of weeks administrative leave. And a couple of days into it, I got a phone call from a lieutenant, works out of the chief's office, and said, hey, I just need to let you know, we've gotten some information and some intelligence that you're the deceased person, the person that you'd shot, was connected to a larger criminal organization south of the border. And so
Oh, man.
the follow-up, these people were a little upset, and they've indicated to his immediate family that they're going to retaliate against you. And I didn't really think much of it at the time.
Is it, when we talked on the phone, I could tell you about some stories I have as a prosecutor.
Sure.
And the same thing, when you hear it, you you anticipate and you accept a certain amount of risk.
You
Looking
do.
back on it
You
now,
do.
and I don't know if this is the same for you, my threats weren't as serious as yours, but yeah, I think I would have been.
Well, I wouldn't
I would've been
underestimate
upset.
that, Eric. I mean, we actually had a prosecutor murdered here in the Denver metro area, worked for one of the counties that I worked in,
Yeah.
Adams County.
Yeah.
That case has still not been solved.
Wow.
And it is horrid. I mean, he was murdered at his house in his yard. So
Wow.
prosecutors are absolutely a target. We've had the head of the Colorado Department of Corrections was assassinated at his home here a few years ago.
And I think we're gonna get to that of how we can help with that. So, all right, didn't mean to interrupt you there,
No,
but
please, by all means.
that's just when I hear that kind of jumps out at you, like hearing
Yeah,
that.
it does.
Yeah.
But
So,
the flip side, I mean, I don't want to seem cavalier about it, but
Right.
at the same time, you do this job,
mhm.
you understand that there are risks, and at the same time, there's a lot of investment that agencies make and that individuals make in training. And I always, not always, but as much as I could, took every opportunity I could to get extra training, whatever that might be. Um, and so, I would participate in things, like Rocky Mountain Haida would do, training courses, you name it. And so,
Hmm.
and you have experience, and, you think about these things, you work through it, and yeah, you get threatened. I mean, every working police officer I've ever met in my life at some point or another has faced personal harm, and you're threatened with it all the time. I mean, even just people in passing. So it's not um, it's not something you freak out about. It's
Right.
something you keep aware of.
Hmm.
So in this particular case, I mean, certainly my radar was up because I was very well aware. I mean, I would get briefings from DEA and the El Paso Intelligence Center, and we would see the things that were going on, in different places and border states and
Yeah, and
here, and
you're not that far
especially,
off. I mean,
absolutely,
yeah, I mean, you're just right across the border from us here in New Mexico.
absolutely,
So it's, I mean, you can get there in a day where I'm at, and we're
exactly,
very close to the border. So
exactly.
absolutely.
And so, you would see some of the brutality and some of the things that have kind of changed up in the last couple of decades, with some of the cartels. It turned out he was a very violent individual, routinely armed. And yes, he confronted me, pointed a gun at me, and, the end result was he lost his life. It's absolutely not what I would have preferred, but a violent, bad person. And
Yes.
so, anyway, that intelligence comes through, and I didn't give it a ton of thought. I made my wife aware of it,
Sure. I
but
know exactly what you mean.
yeah,
I think a lot of officers listen to this, they get these threats all the time. And
sure.
right. And I think you're going to expand on how it kind of, where the story goes next. So don't let me
Yeah,
cut you off.
yeah.
Go
No,
ahead.
please jump in anytime you want, Eric. It's a conversation, my friend.
This is where it gets
Um,
good. So we're going to want to pay attention.
yeah. So that just kind of went into the back burner for me for a little bit. I went back to work. Things just kind of doing my thing. I'm still enjoying the assignment I'm at, and that was fine. It was great. Didn't have any issues at home. Nothing going on. To be honest with you, I mean, I know that there is a transparency issue with police use of force, and I support that transparency issue in identifying officers. And at the same time, I'm aware, different parts of the country have policies that if they
Yeah.
do, a threat assessment and a risk assessment on an individual, uh, or individuals involved in a use of force incident, they may decline to identify that police officer to the press. So
Right.
I did not give it much thought. I expected, because they had developed good, some decent information, decent intelligence, that there was a certainly a realistic threat against me, that I wouldn't be identified. And so that shooting was in February, and by July, in a very 21st century way of discovery, my wife called me frantically at work, and she had just found out from her friends on Facebook that I had been identified on the front page of our major newspaper here.
Wow.
And I was floored. I was like, "Whoa, hang on a second." And that was extremely terrifying, because
They
now,
identified you by name.
by name, yes, they absolutely did, and it was an interesting fallout that came from that. But what became even more important, and where we got tuned in into something that we really didn't even understand existed before, was the amount of information that exists out there about us, about every single person in the United States. I mean, with these data brokers, you've got, you know, verified information. I think somewhere about 97% of the adult population in this country
Yeah.
is out there for the grabs. And I don't mean for the, it's out there for the taking, like you have to go to an office or a county assessor, or some sort of government building or a
Right.
court. I mean, you get online, you open your search engine, you open your browser, and it's there in minutes. And as my wife was literally on the phone with me, terrified about this, she finds, all kinds of stuff. Oh, look, here's you here. Oh, it's got my name too. It's got your parents. It's got, oh, look, here's all the addresses. And there's a picture of your house. You can get that right off of any of these real estate sites.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
And then you
some of the
factor social media into it now as well.
the stuff that people give
Another
up about themselves too is
right.
staggering.
We're on
Um,
vacation right now. Come around
yeah,
our house. Right.
there's
Yeah.
that. I mean, it's amazing the amount of information that people put out there about themselves, and it's amazing the amount that they don't know they put out about themselves. And it's you're walking around. I don't know anybody who doesn't have a smartphone now. You're walking around with essentially a GPS locator surveillance
Yes.
device,
And it sounds
and
like you kind of learned this kind of the hard way. So
oh yeah,
knowing that you had these organizations that are known for violence and your
yes,
name just got released and then I think you said you just went to Google and like almost instantly your address is there. So
yep. It was very quick. It was very
yeah,
fast.
what did you decide to do at that point?
Uh well, it was it's kind of funny as you ask because I think back to that first phone call and everything. You kind of go through some of these traumas, and your memory just kind of gets lost. I know, at one point, my wife wasn't comfortable in the house, and
Yeah,
I think we had stayed in a hotel for, you can't do that forever.
right.
Um, I remember, I remember being up all night, in a chair in my front room, sitting there with a firearm and just a lot of chaos. We had good relationships with all our neighbors, where we lived at, and so they kept their eyes peeled. Of course,
Mhm.
we didn't have issues with that. Um, Over time, however, we did eventually relocate, and also over time, I was very fortunate. I had a victims advocate within our agency that got me connected with a it's essentially a state program that was primarily designed for domestic violence victims,
Yeah.
where I got a masked address it's essentially an address, a mailing address that the state runs, and I use that for pretty much everything. I use it for my motor vehicle, I use it for my driver's license. I'm authorized by state law to use it for pretty much anything that requires a home address. Um, it's got hoops to jump through, little pains you got to mess with. Um, Part of it was I can't remember the last time I voted. We haven't been registered for years, so um, I've laughed about that the last. I guess it would be the last couple of elections because I'd say, well, if you're dissatisfied with who's in there, you don't get to blame me because I don't
Yeah,
have anything to do with it. Um,
right.
and that's really because, for the most part, many of our counties is who's responsible for voter registration. They were very lax in their uh, in
Mhm.
their
Yeah.
security, and then they're in how they hang on to their information. And depending on what state you live, I know California, they sell your info.
Really?
California DMV they sell batches of information to
No
data
kidding.
brokers, and
Wow.
many I would imagine many other states or counties or individual government entities do because that's a way to increase your revenue.
Sure. And
So
that's I know in New Mexico, that's how they pull the jury pool. It comes from motor vehicle,
yeah,
records.
yep.
So I'm sure it's similar to a lot of other states, so a lot of information available there.
There's a tremendous amount out there. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. You've got these, whether it's data brokers or the big ones, um, and they gather up so much. Now, most of this, people ask, why is this? Well, most of it's for fairly legitimate purposes. I mean, it's for targeted advertising and marketing and things of that nature. Um, but overall, I think Americans are starting to become very, very much more aware and maybe even concerned about some of this.
And I think that sort of gets back to what we're
Yep.
talking about tonight. If you're an officer, even if you do everything right, you've been to my classes, I taught you everything, you know what you're doing, even if it's done right, that narrative may be created through social media. And I think that's sort of where you can come in now.
Hmm.
And I see a lot of this with young officers, and I have a large audience of young officers that watch this podcast. Maybe you can sort of give them some advice of if they get in one of these unfortunate events, even if you've done everything right, what can they start doing now to protect themselves so, 20 minutes after they're involved in an incident, they don't
Hmm.
have a mob of people outside their house?
Well, I think you hit on a really important point, Eric, and that is you need to do something way before this
Right.
critical incident happens. Your actions need to be handled well in advance. And so there's some significant things that you need to do for your privacy, and some of them you may not like. and some of them they're going to take effort and they're going to take work. Um, but probably the primary one is you need to sit down with a search engine and you need to run your name. If your name is Steve White or Joe Nelson, maybe you don't have anything to worry about because there's so many of those guys out there.
Yeah.
But if you have any kind of a unique name or you spell it any kind of a unique way, um, you're going to get found real quick. Even if you
Mm-hmm.
have a very, prolific, prolific, yeah, you have a name that everybody
That
has,
word.
Smith or Jones or something like that. Um, I promise you, with dedication, someone can find you. And I've played, I've had my own little experiments, not invading anyone's privacy, but just seeing what's out there in the public space. We're not even getting into the dark web here, but the public space that's available. And I was able to track down all kinds of people I know with very common names, down to where they currently
Yeah.
live. It's not
Mm-hmm.
something that's very difficult to do if your stuff is out there. So
Sure.
the main thing that I tell people to do, and I know I've given you a copy of a letter that I sent to my former law enforcement colleagues. There's a great link in there for doing it yourself. And it is a link to a GitHub repository. And there's a journalist. I've never spoken to this person. She's a privacy advocate, covers privacy topics and tech. And she put together this really good um, GitHub repository of websites and links and tells you how to go through um, the big data brokers, the big problem ones. I think there's about 20 of them in total, and to go through, check to see if your information's on there, and then opt out. And you need to go through that process to
Right.
opt out and get your stuff flagged off there. Um, and generally they do comply, but it can take time. It can take between 72 hours for some, up to 6 to 8 weeks for others. Now,
Right. And I think I've looked at that. I looked at that. And I took a look at that before the show, studying it, and I thought that was fantastic. And like you said, it's going to take a little bit of work. And I have your letter, and I think you mentioned you didn't mind sharing it with the law enforcement community, so I
no,
wasn't
feel
gonna
free.
just kind
Please
of
share it.
post it on my
Please share it.
website. But right, and if anybody listening to the podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, if you're a member of my email list, I will, because I vet that to make sure that's law
Mhm.
enforcement and public safety. I will send a copy out that way, and if you want a copy and you're listening, just sign up and I'll send it to you. It's not a it's not a spam email list. I probably only send about one email every 2 months, and it's just when a new video comes out or something important like this.
Absolutely.
So if anybody wants that, thanks to John for putting that together. There's some really good links on there to get you started and get you at least thinking about this.
And that's just to get you started, to be fair. That's
Right.
that's kind of chipping some ice off the iceberg, but it's the start that you need to do, and you need to do that for yourself. If you're married, and your spouse shares your last name, well, you probably need to work on that as well for them. Um,
Yeah. Good
it's
point.
it's a significant problem. It's a significant issue. You need to see just how much of you is out there. And I think most people, when they do it, you need to do it in advance, not after your critical incident like I had to. When you do it, you may be very unpleasantly surprised at just how much of you is out there that you didn't have any say in putting out there. This just came from the data brokers. So that's a big one. You can do that do it yourself route. I do it, and you need to be aware you're going to have to do it again, and you're going to have to continue
Right.
to do it again. This isn't like one and done. You're going to have to be going back, every few months, and you're going to have to go through that process and check and see, am I here? Am I here? Am I here? And you may find, oh, look, there's a whole new data broker site. They've changed their name and rebranded, or they've bought and
Yeah.
sold data sets and it's posted somewhere else. So you're going to have to stay on top of it. You can also go through, there's some services that are out there that you pay them. It is, I think, a pretty fair, um, cost for your privacy, and you pay them, and they essentially go through that process and do it for you, and they continually stay on it. It's fairly easy, once you're a larger company and you've got the compute power and the servers, to be able to scan and to be able to scan the internet writ large for some of these data sets. So, but it's not necessarily something, unless you're really tech savvy, you can just do at home to continually check.
Right. And it's getting so complex, and like you said, it's constantly
It is.
changing.
It
So
is. So that's the two big things I would say. First off, have a look at the do-it-yourself part of it. Google your name. Just go to Google. I don't use Google anymore. I use DuckDuckGo because I'm a privacy guy, and Google gathers everything on you anyway. And so the
It
more the
does.
more
Yep.
I've gone down this privacy rabbit hole, the more I have gotten away from providers, websites, things like that that I know are constantly harvesting my data, whether it's just cookies and they want to know what I'm browsing or where because some of these things they're what did you browse before? What kind of news do you consume? What kind of products do you browse on? You're purchasing. A lot of that's for targeted advertising. It might be fairly benign, but it's going somewhere.
Right. It's almost remarkable. I've it's with all the I don't know for sure. My brother's a tech guy. He talks about having all these Alexas laying around, but my wife and I were talking about buying a car, and then I pull up my phone or my laptop, and the first thing I see are car ads, or maybe even specific, like, oh, here's the new GMC Denali, or
It's
talking about a
really
Toyota. Here's
yeah.
the new Toyota. It's crazy.
It's disturbing if you grew up and you had George Orwell in your curriculum. It's troubling, and
Yes.
um, and it's also troubling again. Backing up here for just a moment, because we were talking about establishing probable cause, operating within the constraints of the Bill of Rights as a law enforcement officer.
Hmm.
It's also disturbing because you recognize you're like, wait a minute, what right do they have to know this about me?
Hmm.
Where's my privacy in my person's papers and effects? Those are pretty important things. So I just should give that away because it's this benevolent company. Okay, well, where does it go from there? How does
Sure.
that get used? And people are starting to pay attention to some of these privacy issues. It's interestingly through
Yes.
politics. I mean, they had the Cambridge Analytica scandal, so called, and it's like, well, they bought what Facebook was selling to target, electors, to target people, and
Right.
that's what's available out there, guys. And so, get yourself some peace of mind in advance. Either go through the process, do it yourself, or go out and see somebody. I think it's joindeleteme.com. You got to be careful because I think there's I was told that there's like some Eastern European guy that bought deleteme.com, the URL. So it's not really them. I think it's
Really.
joindeleteme.com. So it's important that
Wow.
people know the difference. But it's Abine, Abine. Um, and make the decision. Do I need to spend the money with these folks? Um, and everybody I've talked to there is fantastic, and they know and understand the scope of this, and they're working very hard to address this from a technological standpoint. But it is a service, and so you're going to pay for it.
Is this something if you yeah, I mean if you got a young officer, is not making a ton of money, is this something it's definitely sounds worth it. Is it something that's affordable? Is it like a continuing service kind of like, yeah, you pay your $10 a month for Netflix and
Yeah.
you get to watch all your movies. Why not do a service like
Well, I would
this?
say if you're paying $10 a month for Netflix, I think it comes down. I'd have to look. I haven't looked at their website in a couple of. Actually, it's been about a month, so I don't know where their pricing's at. But I remember it being somewhere in the $100 plus range for a person. And so you're already spending that on Netflix and Starbucks and Amazon.
Sure. So that's like a one-time thing and then
Yeah, they
they
do it
go
one
and kind
time,
of
and I
do
think
it.
it works for a year, and then you
Wow.
renew it.
That's
You
yeah,
re-
right.
and forgive me, I should be more up to date on. I should have been more up to date on that when I came in to talk to you today. Um,
Well, it's all right. An approximation. I think when you're anything within that area, and then you save the time where you don't have to do it yourself. I've had to learn that lesson with cars.
mhm.
It's like I'm an attorney. I'm not a mechanic. It's going to take me all weekend to do this, fix this thing in the car, and I can just go pay a couple $100 to have the mechanic do
And
it.
it's and that's fine too. I mean, one of my all time favorite police officers. I was talking to him here a couple months ago about this issue, and he's still on the job. He's originally from Philly. He came out here to Aurora, and he's worked. I don't even know how many decades now out here. He's getting ready to retire. I just love this guy. I mean, he's a classic old time police officer. Salty guy. I had to work with him for a year before I could understand his accent because I don't speak Philly. But
Nice.
he's a wonderful guy. And I was going through and showing him all of this, and he just looked at me and he said, "I'm too old and I'm too dumb. I don't even work on my car. I'm just gonna go pay for somebody to do it for me." And I was like, "Okay, Joe, if that's what you need to do, I want you to do it because I want you to be safe. I want you to." And again, he's at the downward slope of his career, and he doesn't really care anymore, I guess, and he's going to be moving anyway. But if you're going to make this a career, if you're a younger officer or you're maybe halfway through or whatever, you need to know what's out there about you, and you need to find out about it now, and then you need to take the steps to remove that as much as you can. That is, I mean, I would say that is just as important as, do you wear your vest? Do you put a vest on in the locker room? I know some departments mandate it, some places don't. Do you check to make sure that your sidearm is cleaned and fully loaded and properly secured, in your holster? Do you know that your tools are functioning and working and where you need them when you go out? Do you check your car? We had to do a vehicle checklist every time. You go through, check the oil,
Yeah.
check under the back seat, make sure there's no guns, drugs, or any other weird things that got left in there by the guy from before. Um,
Right.
I noticed though nobody ever finds money. Have you ever noticed that? They never find money in the
Yeah.
back of the police car. I don't know why that is,
That's
but
true.
you find everything
Yeah.
else.
That's true.
Um,
Yeah.
but if you do all those things, well, now you need to do this because this is for you. This is for your home. This is for your family. You get paid to take the risks. You have the training. You have the investment of your department, your colleagues, the citizens who rely upon you. Um, those are all important things. This is where you need to take care of you.
You could find yourself still in a very tough situation. And just like you said, one of the themes that I stress in my training is a quote from The Art of War: every battle is won before it's
Absolutely, it
fought.
is.
Or another quote, something similar, where do what is difficult while it is easy, what is large while it is small. It means you can't wait until they're on your doorstep. You have to take those steps now. This is a topic that we talked about tonight that I don't think is discussed much at all. You hear the cyber attacks and things like that, but privacy for you as the officer and what you can be doing about it now, I think is something that you have to look into. And you gave some good information. Um, I appreciate you sharing your story and coming on here. And you mentioned there's some resources where you can try to do some of the stuff yourself. I'm going to share that with the listeners.
Mhm.
If anyone needs that, sign up for the email list, send it out to you, or just contact me and I'll send it to you. And then you also mentioned you do some consulting with Abine. What was that website again? Because I don't know off the top of my head. I looked at it. It looks like a very good
Yeah.
site from what I
The,
saw on it. It looks really good.
so the name of the company is Abine, and they have some different services. Delete Me is the service that they offer primarily for
Okay.
scrubbing you from these data brokers.